I stood in the ruins of what had once been the Henschel Tiger production facility in Kassel, Germany, on a grey morning in late May 1945. The war had been over for 3 weeks, and the silence was almost as unsettling as the constant bombardment had been. My name is Captain James Morrison, United States Army Ordnance Department, and I had spent the last 4 years studying German armored vehicles, trying to understand the technological edge that had made their tanks so formidable on the battlefield. The factory floor was a graveyard of steel and ambition. Partially completed Tiger II hulls sat on assembly lines that would never move again, their thick armor plates a testament to German engineering prowess and strategic miscalculation. Beside me stood Lieutenant Colonel Robert Patterson, my commanding officer, and Major Heinrich Braun, a former Wehrmacht tank officer who now served as our technical liaison and translator. "This is where they built the most powerful tank of the war," Braun said quietly, his English accented but clear. "And now it's just rubble and scrap metal." Patterson pulled out a cigarette, lighting it against the spring breeze that swept through the bombed-out roof. "I need you to understand something, Captain Morrison. What happens to these tanks in the next few months will be decided by people who've never seen combat, never faced a Tiger in battle. Your report will inform those decisions." I had been tasked with cataloging all remaining German armored vehicles, assessing their condition, and making recommendations about their disposition. It seemed like a straightforward assignment until I began to understand the political and military complexities involved. The Tiger tank wasn't just a piece of military hardware, it was a symbol, a propaganda tool, and a technological treasure trove that multiple nations wanted to either preserve, study, or destroy. Over the following weeks, I traveled across occupied Germany with a small team of specialists, documenting every Tiger I and Tiger II we could locate. We found them abandoned in fields, hidden in barns, disabled on roadsides, and occasionally still operational in military depots. Each tank told a story of the final, desperate months of the war. Near Paderborn, we discovered a Tiger I that had been abandoned intact when its crew ran out of fuel. Sergeant William Chen, my assistant, and a mechanical engineer in civilian life, spent an entire day examining the vehicle. "Captain, look at this," he called from inside the tank. I climbed up and peered through the turret hatch. The transmission is incredibly complex. The steering system, the interleaved road wheels, everything is over-engineered. Brilliant design in some ways, but a maintenance nightmare. "Could we get it running?" I asked. "With the right parts and enough time, sure. But that's the problem these tanks had throughout the war. They needed specialized components, skilled mechanics, and constant maintenance. Breakdown in combat and you're a sitting duck." I made detailed notes. The Tiger's technical sophistication was both its greatest strength and its fatal weakness. The 80mm gun could destroy any Allied tank at ranges where return fire was ineffective. The thick armor could withstand most Allied anti-tank weapons, but the complexity made it unreliable, difficult to repair, and expensive to produce. In early June, I was summoned to Frankfurt for a meeting at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. The conference room was filled with officers from American, British, French, and Soviet military intelligence units, all interested in German military technology. General Thomas Bradley, representing the U.S. Army's Research and Development Division, chaired the meeting. "Gentlemen, we're here to discuss the disposition of captured German armored vehicles, particularly the Tiger tanks. Captain Morrison, you've been surveying these vehicles. What's your assessment?" I stood and moved to the map board where I had marked the locations of known Tigers. "Sir, we've identified approximately 140 Tiger I and Tiger II tanks in various conditions across the American, British, and Soviet zones. Perhaps another 60 are in French-controlled areas. The actual number may be higher. Some vehicles were scuttled or hidden by their crews." "Operational status?" asked Colonel Whitmore from British intelligence. "Less than 20% are in running condition. Most have mechanical failures, battle damage, or were deliberately disabled. Another 30% could potentially be restored with significant effort. The remainder are essentially wrecks, suitable only for study or scrap." A Soviet officer, Major Dmitry Volkov, spoke up in heavily accented English. "These tanks represent significant intelligence value. Soviet Union wishes to study German tank design for our own development programs." "As do we," General Bradley replied smoothly. "Which brings us to the central question, what do we do with these vehicles?" The discussion that followed revealed the competing interests at play. The Americans wanted to preserve examples for testing and study at Aberdeen Proving Ground. The British sought Tigers for their tank museum and technical evaluation. The French wanted them as war trophies and for their own military assessment. The Soviets, who had captured the largest number of German vehicles, were already shipping Tigers back to Russia for analysis. But there was another faction in the room that surprised me: representatives from the Allied Control Council, the governing body for occupied Germany. "Gentlemen," said Ambassador Charles Hendricks, "I must remind you that the Potsdam Conference is approaching. One of the key discussions will be the complete demilitarization of Germany. That includes the destruction of all military equipment that could potentially be used to rearm." "You're suggesting we destroy the Tigers?" I asked, unable to hide my shock. "I'm suggesting that we need to consider the political implications of preserving them. Germany must never again pose a military threat to Europe. Keeping hundreds of their most advanced tanks intact, even as museum pieces, sends the wrong message." The meeting adjourned without resolution, but I left with a sinking feeling. The decision about the Tigers' fate would be made not on technical or historical grounds, but on political considerations by people who had never seen these machines in action. Over the following months, I continued my survey work while the political debate intensified. I interviewed dozens of former German tank crews, mechanics and engineers, trying to understand not just the technical specifications, but the human dimension of these vehicles. In July, I met Oberleutnant Karl Fischer, a Tiger commander who had fought on both the eastern and western fronts. We sat in a displaced persons camp near Munich, drinking weak coffee and discussing his experiences. "The Tiger was a monster," he said, his eyes distant with memory. "When everything worked, when you had fuel and ammunition, when the terrain was suitable, you felt invincible. I watched our 88mm gun destroy Soviet T-34s at ranges where they couldn't even see us. We held up entire Allied advances with a single tank." "But," I prompted, sensing there was more, "but it broke down constantly. The transmission would fail, the engine would overheat, the complex suspension system required constant maintenance. And in the final year of the war, we had no spare parts, no fuel, and no hope." He looked at me directly. "Captain, do you know how most Tiger crews lost their tanks? Not to enemy fire. We abandoned them when they broke down because we couldn't repair them or had no fuel to move them." This pattern emerged repeatedly in my interviews. The Tiger's fearsome reputation was deserved, but its operational reliability was abysmal. Of the approximately 1,350 Tiger Is and 490 Tiger IIs produced during the war, most were lost to mechanical failure or abandonment, rather than combat destruction. In August, I received orders to report to Potsdam, where the Allied conference was concluding. The decisions made there would reshape Europe for decades, including the fate of German military equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson briefed me on the outcome. The Potsdam Agreement includes provisions for complete German demilitarization. All military equipment is to be destroyed or removed from German territory. The only exceptions are small numbers retained for intelligence purposes or museum display. "What does that mean for the Tigers?" I asked. "It means we destroy most of them. The US will keep 6 for testing and museum purposes. The British will keep 4. The Soviets have already taken what they want. The French get 2. Everything else gets scrapped or used for target practice." I felt a strange sense of loss. These machines represented the pinnacle of German armored vehicle design, and we were about to systematically destroy them. But I also understood the reasoning. Germany had launched 2 devastating world wars in a generation. The Allies were determined to prevent a third. The destruction began in September. I was assigned to oversee the disposal of Tigers in the American zone, a task that proved both technically challenging and emotionally conflicting. Some tanks were used as targets for testing Allied anti-tank weapons. Others were systematically dismantled, their components separated and melted down for scrap. A few were simply blown up with explosives. Near Stuttgart, we prepared a Tiger II for demolition. Sergeant Chen and I conducted a final inspection before the engineers set their charges. "Seems like a waste," Chen said, running his hand along the massive barrel of the 88mm gun. "All that engineering, all that effort, just to blow it up." "The engineering will survive in our reports and photographs," I replied, "but the weapon itself represents everything the Allies are trying to eliminate from Germany. Militarism, aggression, the capacity to wage war." The demolition was carried out efficiently. Explosives were placed in the engine compartment and ammunition storage areas. When detonated, the tank was torn apart from the inside, rendered completely unusable. We repeated this process dozens of times across the American zone, but not everyone agreed with this approach. In October, I received a visit from Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, a civilian engineer who had worked on Tiger development at Henschel. "Captain Morrison, I understand you're destroying these tanks," he said, agitation evident in his voice. "Do you realize what you're destroying? These vehicles represent years of research and development. The metallurgy alone, the armor composition, the heat treatment processes, this knowledge could be valuable for peaceful applications." "Dr. Hoffmann, I'm following orders. The decision to destroy these vehicles was made at the highest political levels." "Political levels," he repeated bitterly. "Politicians who don't understand that technology is neutral. A tank engine's principles apply to civilian vehicles. Armor metallurgy informs civilian steel production. You're throwing away knowledge because of fear." His arguments troubled me because they contained truth. The technology embodied in the Tiger tanks was valuable beyond its military applications, but the political reality was undeniable. Germany's military capabilities had to be eliminated to ensure peace. As autumn progressed, I witnessed the systematic destruction of Germany's Tiger tank force. Some of the most historically significant vehicles were reduced to scrap metal. Tanks that had fought at Kursk, Normandy, and the Ardennes were blown apart or cut up for salvage. The few that survived, sent to museums or testing facilities, represented a tiny fraction of the original production. By November, my primary assignment was complete. We had catalogued and disposed of all Tigers in the American zone, except for the handful designated for preservation. I compiled my final report, detailing the technical specifications, operational history, and ultimate fate of these vehicles. In December, I was granted leave and took the opportunity to visit the Tank Museum at Aberdeen Proving Ground, where one of the preserved Tiger had been shipped. The museum curator, Colonel James Harrington, gave me a private tour. "This is one of the few complete operational Tigers remaining in the world," he explained, as we walked around the massive vehicle. "We'll use it for testing and eventually public display. Future generations need to understand what we faced in combat." "Do you think we made the right decision?" I asked. "Destroying most of them?" Harrington considered the question carefully. "From a military standpoint, we eliminated a potential threat. From a historical standpoint, we lost irreplaceable artifacts. From a political standpoint, we made the only choice the Allies could make in 1945. He paused. "But yes, I think it was right. These tanks weren't just machines. They were instruments of a regime that had to be completely dismantled." As 1945 drew to a close, I reflected on everything I had witnessed. The Tiger tank had been a formidable weapon, feared by Allied soldiers and admired even by its enemies. Its 80mm gun could destroy any Allied tank. Its thick armor could withstand most Allied weapons. Its psychological impact on the battlefield was substantial, but it had also been a strategic failure. Too complex, too unreliable, too expensive to produce in quantity. Germany had wasted resources on a small number of sophisticated tanks when it needed large numbers of simpler, more reliable vehicles. The Tiger program was emblematic of German military thinking, technically brilliant, but strategically flawed. And now, in the aftermath of war, the decision to destroy most of these tanks was equally emblematic of the Allied determination to prevent German rearmament. The Potsdam Agreement's demilitarization provisions weren't just about eliminating weapons. They were about eliminating the capacity and will to wage aggressive war. In January 1946, I was reassigned to help establish technical exchange programs between the American military and the rebuilding German industries. The goal was to redirect German engineering talent toward peaceful purposes: civilian vehicles, construction equipment, industrial machinery. I worked with many former German military engineers during this period, including several who had contributed to Tiger tank development. They were brilliant minds, capable of remarkable innovation, but they had been directed toward military applications for over a decade. "What we need," one engineer told me, "is the opportunity to apply our skills to reconstruction rather than destruction. The same metallurgical knowledge that made Tiger armor can improve civilian steel production. The same engine design principles can create better trucks and tractors." This became the underlying philosophy of post-war German industrial development. The engineering expertise that had created the Tiger tank was redirected towards civilian purposes. Mercedes-Benz, which had built engines for Tiger tanks, returned to producing civilian vehicles. Henschel shifted from tank production to locomotives and heavy trucks. By mid-1946, the destruction of Germany's Tiger tank force was essentially complete. Of the approximately 1,840 Tigers of all types produced during the war, fewer than a dozen complete operational examples survived. Perhaps another 20 existed in various states of disrepair, scattered across museums and proving grounds worldwide. The rest had been destroyed, scrapped, or cut apart for salvage. I attended a conference in Washington in July 1946, where military historians and intelligence officers discussed lessons learned from the war. During a session on armored warfare, I presented my findings on the Tiger tank. The Tiger represents a cautionary tale about military development, I concluded my presentation. Superior technology doesn't guarantee success if it comes at the cost of reliability, maintainability, and quantity. Germany produced fewer than 2,000 Tigers total. The Soviet Union produced over 50,000 T-34 tanks. The United States produced nearly 50,000 Sherman tanks. In the end, quantity had a quality all its own. But the decision to destroy them after the war, asked one attendee, wasn't that purely political? It was primarily political, I acknowledged, but it was also necessary. The Allies couldn't risk leaving Germany with the capacity to rearm. Destroying the Tigers was part of a comprehensive demilitarization program that included eliminating all German military equipment, dismantling weapons factories, and preventing military research and development. Looking back from the perspective of 1946, I could see how the fatal decision that sealed the Tiger's fate had been made long before the war ended. It wasn't a single order or directive. It was the cumulative result of Allied strategic planning that dated back to at least the Tehran Conference in 1943. The Allies had determined that preventing another German war of aggression required not just military defeat, but complete elimination of Germany's capacity to wage war. That meant destroying not just the weapons themselves, but the infrastructure, knowledge, and industrial capacity to produce them. The Tiger tank, as the most advanced and feared German armored vehicle, became a symbol of everything that needed to be eliminated. Preserving hundreds of Tigers would have contradicted the entire demilitarization policy. It would have left Germany with a ready-made corps of armored forces that could potentially be reactivated in a future conflict. So the decision was made, inevitably perhaps, to destroy them. Not because they weren't valuable or historically significant, but because political necessity overrode historical preservation. The Tiger tanks had to die so that Germany could be reborn as a peaceful, democratic nation. I spent the final months of 1946 completing documentation of the Tiger program, technical specifications, production numbers, combat records, and ultimate disposition. This information would be valuable for future military historians and would ensure that even though the tanks themselves were mostly gone, the knowledge of their existence and capabilities would survive. In December, just before I rotated back to the United States, I visited the tank cemetery near Grafenwöhr where dozens of Tigers had been scrapped. Enormous piles of cut armor plate, turrets with their guns removed, engine blocks stripped of components. The detritus of Germany's most powerful tank lay scattered across muddy fields. Major Braun accompanied me on this final inspection. He had been my liaison throughout the project and had watched the systematic destruction of German military equipment with mixed emotions. "Do you think history will judge this decision correctly?" he asked as we surveyed the wreckage. "I think history will understand that it was necessary," I replied. The Tiger was a remarkable machine, but it was also an instrument of aggression. Germany used these tanks in an attempt to dominate Europe. The Allies couldn't permit any possibility of that happening again. "And yet," Braun said quietly, "by destroying them you've made them legends. The few that survive in museums will be viewed with awe. People will forget their weaknesses and remember only their strengths. The Tiger will become mythologized precisely because so few remain." He was right, I realized. By making Tigers so rare, we had inadvertently enhanced their mystique. Future generations would see these machines in museums and imagine them as unstoppable behemoths, forgetting that most were abandoned due to mechanical failure or lack of fuel, not destroyed in combat. As I prepared to leave Germany in January 1947, I understood that the fatal decision that sealed the Tiger's fate had been made for compelling reasons. The world of 1945 was determined to prevent another catastrophic war. The systematic destruction of German military equipment, including the Tiger tanks, was part of that broader effort. Whether it was the right decision from a historical preservation standpoint remained debatable. We had destroyed irreplaceable artifacts, eliminated opportunities for detailed technical study, and deprived future generations of the chance to see these machines intact. But from the political and strategic standpoint of 1945, it was the only decision the victorious Allies could make. The Tiger tanks had been the most feared armored vehicles of World War II. Their destruction in the war's aftermath ensured that they would never again threaten European peace. And in that sense, the fatal decision that sealed their fate was not a tragedy, but a necessary step in rebuilding a shattered continent. As my transport ship left Bremerhaven harbor, carrying me back across the Atlantic, I looked back at the German coastline disappearing into the winter mist. Somewhere in that landscape, a handful of Tiger tanks still existed, preserved in museums or testing facilities, but the vast majority were gone, reduced to scrap metal and memory. The fatal decision had been made, executed and completed. The Tiger tanks of Nazi Germany were no more, and perhaps that was exactly as it should be.